But there are some parts that I think people might think are salacious. Like you said, you talk about drugs, but I really loved it. It was refreshing that you aren't talking about it in a sort of like dare keep kids off of drugs sort of way. I thought it was fairly positive. Talk to me about that experience of writing about drug use and not coming at it from a scary, this is what you shouldn't do kind of vantage point.
I just want to be very clear that in no way is the book a permission granting, like, go ahead and try drugs when you're 15 years old.
Right.
It is, I think especially in the queer community, it's important for us to talk about this linkage between shame, fear, trauma,
self-medication.
And self-medication.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the queer community, statistically, we drink more, we smoke more, we do more drugs, we take more risks. And a lot of times we don't talk about what is the root of that? What is making us do these things? So there's a little bit of that. We wanted to have a platform to talk a little bit about some of our behavior as young people and the result of growing up in a society that was very homophobic and misogynist, and how we sort of, in some ways, numbed the experience of being queer in that time. But there's also a sort of sisterly story here around, while we were having some of our most difficult experiences with each other,
we had a lot of fun on
we had
acid.
fun and we did these, and in some ways, it brought us back to this childlike state in this, and we were very experimental, and we were part of a culture that was, that was experimenting with drugs. And Tegan's right, a lot of times guys, they take drugs and they go on these like, soul searching, whatever, like, I don't know, they're allowed to experiment, and the result of that is often sort of like, oh, it was really, mind-opening. Or I'm thinking of like bands and authors and
like
people.
The Beatles.
The
people
Beatles.
Like that,
I
yeah.
didn't want to say it. You said
Harry
it first.
Styles looking very fine on the cover
Yeah, he
of Rolling
looks
Stone.
That makes me feel
But talking
straight
about
looking at
taking
Harry,
mushrooms,
but
Right.
and no one would ever criticize. We only ever
No.
hear about women who take drugs if they overdosed or died or look terrible. And I think Sarah and I wanted to reflect that while our time of experimentation is over, that it was a part of our lives. I also want to point out that we used it as a device in the book also to showcase how powerful music was when it came into our life. When Sarah and I figured out that we could write music and started songwriting when we were 16 very seriously and started to perform for our friends and be taken seriously as a band, we stopped experimenting with drugs. We stopped using drugs. It replaced it. And I think for Sarah and I, those were the two places where we really were able to shake off some of our insecurities and open up. Those were two places where we were able to really start to explore and use language for the first time about what was happening inside of us. We never sat down and talked about our sexuality, ever. Sarah was having secret relationships with girls, so was I. We never discussed it. But then we would sing these songs to each other. We were each other's first audience, and the songs are so gay sounding to me. Like, it's so clear what we're struggling with. It's so clear that we're singing about girls. And we did this for each other first, then our friends, then family, then strangers started to get into it. And it became a way for us to open up and to feel okay. And so going back and writing about that, discovering all our early songs, releasing them out into the world, I think it's the final step in releasing all of that trauma and sometimes insecurity and fear and anxiety that we felt then, that we still feel now, and sharing that with our audience, who I know really feel that too.
Yeah.